Hello, welcome to the video on solving radical equations. This is our first example set A. And what we're going to do here is take a look at these three problems and just make sure that you understand the procedure to solve radical equations. Okay, and if you have this mastered in this particular video, then you can move on to more challenging problems. So let's go ahead and take a look at our problems, and it says solve and check each equation. Okay, and we need to check our solutions. That's part of the procedure, but let's go ahead and just recall what the procedure is. Okay, the first thing is when you're solving a radical equation, we want the radical, i.e. the square root portion with these type of problems, isolated. Okay, so we have this all by itself, and on the other side of the equation we have our number. Okay, now in this equation it's set up nicely for us, so now what we need to do is go ahead and raise the power to both sides. So here, because we're taking the square root of x, I want to go ahead and square both sides. Okay, so I'm raising the power to 2, just like this. And when we do that, we get rid of the radical. Okay, so that's the whole idea behind solving radical equations, is to raise the power of both sides of the equation to get rid of the radical, and we end up with x equals 49. Okay, now at this point in time we need to go and check. So our original equation was the square root of x equals 7, and of course when we plug in 49 for x, we see that our solution is in fact correct. 7 equals 7, so it checks out. So x equals 7 is in fact the solution. Alright, so let's go down and take a look at this next problem. So here, once again, the radical is isolated. Okay, it's all by itself, and that's what that term isolated means. It's all by itself on the left-hand side. We have our number over here, so let's go ahead and square both sides. So you want to write it this way. All right, so why don't you go ahead and write down the results of that. Okay, so when you square the square root of 2x, the radical goes away, and you're simply left with 2x. And of course, 6 squared is 36. Right, so go ahead and solve the remainder of the equation and check your answer. You should be able to do that at this point in your studies. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and divide both sides of the equation by 2, and we get x is equal to 18. Okay, so now we need to go back and check our solution and see if x equals 18 is in fact the solution. So 2 times x, let's write out the original equation, 2x, write a little bit better than that. Okay, 2x equals 6, or we believe that x is equal to 18, so it's going to be 2 times 18, does that equal to 6? And we know that 2 times 18 is 36, and it checks out, 6 equals 6. Okay, moving on. Alright, so here's our first problem where we're going to have to do one step to isolate the radical before we square both sides. So we want to have this all by itself on the left-hand side, this square root of 4x all by itself. So how can I get that all by itself? Well, I'm going to have to move this negative 3 over to the right-hand side. Okay, so I'm going to do that by adding 3 to both sides of the equation. And now I have the square root of 4x equals 8. Alright, so at this point in time, this problem is set up just like the previous one, so you should be able to go ahead and solve this. So I'm going to go ahead and square both sides now. Alright. So I'm left with 4x equals 64. Okay, so now I'm going to divide 64 by 4. And that's 16, so x equals 16. All right, so let's go ahead and check that in our original equation. And our original equation was the square root of 4x minus 3 equals 5. Okay, so we believe that x is equal to 16, so we have to plug that in into our original equation. So this is going to be 4 times 16 minus 3, does that equal 5? And 4 times 16 is 64. 64 minus the square root of 64 minus 3 equals 5. So this is 8 minus 3, and you can see that in fact 5 equals 5. That's a true statement, and so therefore x equals 16 checks out. Now here you might say, well, it looks like every single time we have the solution here, it's going to always work out. Well, in these basic problems, I could see why you would think that, but as the problems become more sophisticated, that's not always the case. Remember, when you square both sides of the equation, you could introduce what we call like extraneous roots. Or you're changing the problem, so you have to be careful to think that, okay, by the time I just do this up to this step and I get my solution here, then I'm done. Checking your solution is absolutely a required part of the process to solving these radical equations. Okay, so if you've mastered and understand the basic procedure here, let's go ahead and take a look at the rest of the example sets and start doing some more challenging problems. Okay, hope to see you there.